evening, everyone. I'm back. I'm Chelsea Ohlemiller with Grief and Goodbyes. And my guest tonight, I am so honored and excited to share with you. This book is beautiful. We will talk about it, but I'm welcoming Merissa Nathan Gerson. She is the author of the book that I just showed you, Forget Prayers, Bring Cake. And she is a New Orleans-based writer, professor, and sex educator, which is super unique and awesome to have on our platform. And her written work has appeared in The Atlantic, The New York Times, Playboy, and Tablet, among others. She was also the inherited trauma consultant for Amazon's Emmy Award-winning television show Transparent. Her work has also been seen a lot in New York Times Modern Love, which is, as a writer, a huge honor. And so I would just love to welcome you, Merissa, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here and grateful for this time with you.
Yeah, so we were just talking. So as obviously you guys just heard, she is based out of, I always say New Orleans, but I don't know how you New Orleans. Everybody says it different, but so we were a little bit late. She has actually been evacuated for 10 days. And so she is up with family on the East Coast. And so we just want to send all of our thoughts to you as you eventually venture back home and hopefully, start to heal down there from the aftermath of the latest storm.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So tell us a little bit for those of my audience and those tuning in that may not know your story like I do. Can you share a little bit about your story and who you are?
Sure. Which part do you want? Like the story for the book or the story of me?
Yeah. So, give us a little bit about yourself. I think your personality really shines through in the book. And so, I feel like your friend without having met you before. So share a little bit of just, what led to the book and a little bit about, your personality and who you are.
Sure. So I used to actually be an advice columnist many years ago. I had a column called Ask Your Yenta, and it started out with just my friends writing into me, and then it became something else altogether. And for years I was writing about sex for big magazines, and I was writing about sex and disability and sex and religion and sex and spirituality, like the orgasm meditation movement and the kink community in the United States, and different ways in which group sex parties can help people heal from trauma and all. So I've been sort of on this path of looking at different healing methods from lots of angles. And someone actually once said to me that my work exists at the nexus of sex and death. So whatever that means, but here we are. So I moved to New Orleans in 2019, and my father got sick, and I didn't know he was sick until a week after I arrived there. And it was one of those moves where you sort of like throw caution to the wind and do something with very little support. So I moved to New Orleans to this new house with very few people in my life. And my dad ended up dying very quickly and very unexpectedly of a rare brain disease. And so I don't know, I was just navigating my grief and noticed that not having a partner, it looked different. And I wanted to give someone like me the gift of what I needed at the time. And the original idea with the title of the book, which is Forget Prayers, Bring Cake, A Single Woman's Guide to Grieving, was not necessarily, like, it ends up having a lot of advice for single women, but it was more, I don't know if you've ever read like The Lesbian's Guide to Sex but
I have not, but sounds interesting.
Well, the title basically is like the sex guide for anyone, but this is the person that's giving you the advice. And so my idea was more that I'm a single woman. Here's what I learned doing this sort of the hard way. And here's what I can give to whomever wants to read it. It doesn't have to be a single person.
Right. And that is, we talked about that a little bit before we jumped on, but like you said, A Single Woman's Guide to Grieving. However, as a married woman with 3 children, I was relating to it and finding a lot of the advice, things even married couples need reminders about, asking for the help that you need and taking care of yourself, and sometimes those things are needed by everyone, not just the single woman. And that's what I love, that your book really does touch in a unique way to single people. that don't have that constant connection sitting right next to you that can help you and guide you through it. But at the same time, it's so relatable to everyone in the grieving community. So yeah. So I will ask, so, you know, in the book and in your column before, which I knew about just from researching you, but you talk a lot about dating and grief and sex and grief. And so we haven't really had anybody on this series that has dove into that kind of vulnerability. And I will tell you a fun fact. My husband and I actually met on Tinder. You talk about Tinder. Yes. I don't tell that to a lot of people. We usually say we met at the restaurant where we actually met. But it's just funny that you talk about it in a way of like, hey, do you get on in Tinder while you're grieving, or do you date while you're grieving? And so I thought that was funny because I thought most people don't know that I actually met my husband on Tinder a long time ago. So, but tell us a little bit about, you know, just how to navigate, how should a single woman or anybody that's single navigate those things, dating and grief and dating and loss?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's no like one thing. Everyone is very different. And also I've been thinking about this today a lot, actually. I think it also depends on who you meet, you know? So
absolutely.
I think some people, I would say in a nutshell, there's a whole chapter on it in the book, but in a nutshell, when you're grieving, like there's a certain amount of veiling of ourselves that's mandated when we're dating someone new, where you're like, I'll take off door number one and then number two. And to keep your own self from being too vulnerable, it's like the strategic unveiling. And that doesn't, you don't get that luxury when you're grieving.
Right.
Like when you're really deeply grieving, at least for me, I don't know about everyone else. So that's why this book is more like, here's what happened to me, take it or leave it, whatever it might resonate with you. But for me, a real quality the month after my father died was that I could see more things than I wanted to. And I was highly sensitive and attuned to a lot of different elements. And also I didn't want people to fake anything. Like I just wanted to be with a lot of vulnerability. And that can be complicated when you're dating because it makes you really vulnerable quickly and the other person really vulnerable quickly. And that sort of caution and control and careful sort of, is this the right person? Should we go together? Do I really like that he like kills rabbits for fun? Like whatever it is, you don't get to have discretion as much because you're sort of thrown into the orbit and it's intense.
Right.
And for some people, that's the thrilling, most beautiful thing in the world because you've just lost someone. And so now you're clinging to another person. But in my experience with myself and a lot of other women I know and men, that can either be, you know, like my cousin, I think, met her husband and then he had a really big loss and they married for the rest of their lives. At least so it seems. And and that's one way, is like two people are ready and they're vulnerable and they're committed. But I think more often than not, we date people that are not necessarily good for us when we're grieving because we're just so excited to have someone close to us when we're feeling such deep emptiness. So the book talks just a lot about when in grief and dating, like one of the hardest things I think, and I'm thinking about this a lot lately, is the waiting you might have to do. I just took an Uber today and it was a little bit awkward and the driver would not stop talking to me about his broken heart. And he had just gone through a breakup, I guess in July, the end of July, this woman walked out on him. So it's been about a month. And he mentioned it like, I didn't even ask. And he just kept mentioning it and mentioning it. And I think that, yeah, there's a time for being capable of going into that place with someone. And there's a time that's not. And it's important to protect yourself and also he was basically saying, it's going to be so long until I go on another date. It's going to be so long. I have a lot of healing to do. And I thought, well, it's good for him that he knows that. And also part of dating while grieving, in my opinion, is if you know that you're kind of a mess, you know, which many of us are and all the time, and sometimes just sometimes, if you know that you're a mess, then what do you do to get your needs met in the meantime, right? Like if you know it's too messy to date and it's too messy to, you know, like for me, if I'm really suffering and then I bring someone close, it could be nice, but they might not think that they're as close as I think they are. Because I need it more than they do or whatever the thing. So then there are a lot of practices that we can do when we aren't ready for, you know, connecting and a lot of relationship, we don't talk about it much, but it's like cleaving to someone else's life and their path and everything involved is upping all the things that you would seek in that relationship on your own. And
Right.
it's not like this sort of cute, kitschy self-love thing that we are often told, but much bigger than that of like, okay, what do you expect him to give you or her or whomever? Like, what are you expecting this partner of whatever gender or non-binary to offer? Then you have to say, okay, can I source that? Can I get
Right.
like, can I get physical touch? Can I have sex somehow else? Can I have it with myself? Can I ask a friend? Can I, like, what are my realist needs that this person, so that you're not accidentally vulnerable to a relationship that just might not be good for you. And I think
Right.
that that's the hardest part to me. Like when you're dating and you're able to mitigate how close you get to that person, like you have that control, doesn't mean you're not being vulnerable or opening, but you're able to sort of step at a pace. That privilege is only for those that are not really grieving. I think
Right.
when we're grieving, we aren't really able to pace ourselves. And for some, that's great, and they stay in relationship and it works. And for some others who are, sometimes grief is because we were damaged by someone and we're grieving how they harmed us, or we've gone through something in our lives that's just deeply not well at this
Mhm.
point. And I know, like, for me, there have been times in my adulthood where I've grieved what harmed me because it made me not get the next thing I wanted or whatever. And in that time of grieving, cleaving isn't necessarily the best thing. Like, we want to be sort of, unless that person's really healthy and you're really healthy, and many of us when we're grieving are not, and that's not
Right.
bad. Like, when I say healthy, I don't mean it in like a you're good or you're bad way, but more, um you'll show you'll your radar for what's good for you might be low. That's what I think.
Right.
My
Well, and
unhealthiest, yeah.
well, and it makes me think too is that, and I'm only speaking from my experience, and you can tell me if this was your case, as a single woman, but I feel like the grieving process really breaks you open and changes you. And so I can't imagine, my husband knew me before my mother passed away in my immense grief. And then he watched the kind of transformation that was happening. And then for lack of, this cliche thing, but I'm a completely different woman than what I was before because of
You
the
are.
experience and the trauma and the pain. So I can't imagine how it would be dating somebody where you really don't have that solid foundation of knowing who you are yet and what you're becoming in your grief. And they're still learning the you that you're presenting while you're also still becoming something else, if that
I like
makes
that.
sense too.
Total. Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think it's, we have a very limited language for describing what grief is. But what you just said to me is actually what it is it's a state where everything you knew has fallen away and you're re-emerging a new person.
Yes.
And instead, like, what we often talk about is, oh, how do we get back to this old person we were? But really, no one goes through it without being like altered and transformed.
Right.
And so what you're saying is interesting too, because you are just on uneven footing. It's like almost like this skinny bridge between two very solid lands, and you're still going to be on land later, but you've got to go through this very delicate bridge. And it's sometimes there's someone that can help you get across, and sometimes
Right.
it's someone who wants to stand with you on the other side. But when you're on that bridge, anybody helping is who you want, So it's
Yep.
really, and I agree with you about this extreme transformation. I think it's just that none of us want to admit when we don't know ourselves. It's so
Right.
uncomfortable. And in the midst of dating and grieving, like although for me, there was a time where I felt so connected to like a soul part of me, like the deepest part of me when I was deeply in grief, that guided me, but it meant also that very few people could join me.
Right.
If I had met another like very deeply soulful person, I think it would have gone somewhere very wild. And
Right.
and also I'm gonna just respond, if that's okay, to Utel Ami about what if you
Yes.
become someone that your husband or yourself doesn't like. And I think the hardest part, first of all, is liking and loving oneself when you're in super a lot of pain.
Yep.
And I think we don't like our pain. We're taught to hide our pain. We're taught to flush our pain. And I think the biggest advice I would have to both a spouse and their spouse and dating is learning to sort of find like, there's a Hebrew word called rahmanis, but like having a little patience with what's happening. And I know for me, the times when I'm dissociated or freaked out and I just pause and I say, do you remember why you're upset today? Do you remember what you've lost? Do you remember what you're going through? And I sort of pat my own self on the shoulder. That actually helps me be kinder. And I think there's a lot, I think one of the hardest things in grief is that you can't worry so much if your husband likes you as much as you've got to worry if you like you.
Right.
And then that will impact the relationship, and it can be alienating. A lot of couples go through hell for a short period after a loss because, men love, and women too. I don't like being so gendered, but a dominatrix in Los Angeles named Mistress Tara Indiana once told me that men really like to meet needs in like a caveman way. And when you're grieving and your needs cannot be met, it really messes with your relationships. Like when you're
Absolutely.
inconsolable, when you and they're like, wait, I wanted your happiness was my pride and I can't make you happy. They're not going to be very happy with you. And I think in those times when you're that miserable, love you the most you can do. And I don't mean like, I really mean it in a sense of, can you be your witness? Can you get a witness? Can you recognize your needs? But also, can you give other people small ways to meet your needs so they feel accomplished? And it
Yes.
sounds so dumb, but it really helps with intimacy, relationships, and family. If instead of being like, my existential crisis, like, why can't you bring me to God? Instead saying, hey, like, you know what would make me feel so good? I really want soup tonight. Would you pick me up soup? And then he gives you soup and you're like, thank you. That's enough. Like, that's enough for him to be like, okay, I have a role in her life while she cries. But giving people roles who are, especially when you have a husband already, giving people roles to meet you in your grief. Sorry, the computer for some reason is sliding.
Oh, that's okay.
But giving people roles to meet you where you are. Like, I think that was one of my big lessons is I often am like, where is everyone? Why don't you love me? And for whatever reason, I was very measured and very careful when I was going through my dad's death because I was in a very tight space where I didn't have support where I lived yet. And I needed to be really calculated and get my needs met. And I learned a lot about it, that when you give people things that they can do, that it really helps. That's all.
Yep.
So in a relationship, if you give them, okay, can you like fulfill my prescription? It's something I really need, or whatever it is. Can you listen for 10 minutes? Something finite that they can accomplish. It really helps people when it's not something they can't do, because people are frightened of pain. We are not taught how to handle pain.
Right. Absolutely. We as a society, I mean, we walk into the store and we want the shiniest, most brilliant vase with no cracks or, anything imperfections. And really grief just totally makes the world look different and what you want and value in other people differently. And, I think for me, grief really made me appreciate people that were willing to show up messy and broken and vulnerable. And I was like, those are my people. And so I think part of that too, just as you're saying in a relationship is, if you don't think that you are liking yourself right now, and maybe your husband isn't liking who you're becoming, talk about it and say, what is making you uncomfortable? Where are the spaces that are, hurtful or different? And talk about it, because a lot of times we don't realize, like you said, in your grief, we don't realize what is shifting and changing until it's already passed. And so, I mean, communication would just be the biggest thing. And I think patience, because time, doesn't really heal. It changes our perspective on things. And so just giving it that time and space. I don't know if you agree, Merissa, but that's what made me think of that. But I also want to say, just to anybody else that's watching, make sure that you comment, and we will try to get to your questions or comments or anything. And also all of Marissa's links for her book and her social media will be in the comment section when we finish talking this evening. So all of that will be just a click away for you guys to follow her and get to know her better and purchase her book. So and so I appreciate the comments that are coming in. And another thing that you touched on in your question is actually a thing I had on my list, which is in the book, you do talk about, both telling people exactly what you need. And also the second part of that is categorizing the people in your life and categorizing your friends into lists of what these, if I'm in a crisis mode of crying, who I need to call to come over, or if I need my kids picked up from school, who I will call to, you didn't use that example, that's my example, but you put your people and your tribe in these categories that you knew when to reach out to them. You have a person to go to the movies, I think you said, who you wouldn't necessarily call when you're on your knees, crying. So do you want to talk about that a little bit, and maybe share how I guess it seemed so simple when I read it, but even 4 years into my grief journey, I thought, this is brilliant. It's so simple, but it's just easy brilliance of what people need.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. It was easy to write it. It's not always easy to do it.
Yeah, that's true.
But my head just blanked for a second thinking about what we were just saying. I think also knowing what we need is hard, especially, in any relationship, whether it's marriage or friendship. When you change, it can be frightening, because sometimes you're in your own dissociated state. Like, I find that when I'm really traumatized, I can't really think about other people's feelings as much as I can when I'm feeling really stable. And like, even that feeling of like, oh, I want to be with another crying mess of a person is a lot harder actually when I'm really down, when I kind of need someone else to just smile at me,
Right.
So all those things are really hard in relationships that we had before loss, because before loss, like we were saying, you're a different person. And now you're like, and it's not just loss, it depends on what your loss is. Like in my case, I witnessed someone die, and that changed my capacity for different things. Like it opened like if we all have like little portals inside of us, it like blew open something in me that required different kind of friendships. It required a different kind of presence. Like my nervous system was really, really sensitive. So if somebody showed up really hyped up, I would be not okay. I know another friend of mine had a really, very severe triple loss this year, and loud noises are just horrifying for her. And so there's all of these things that are kind of confusing when you're suddenly sensitive to things you weren't sensitive for. And now you have to advocate for yourself. And it's really about self-advocacy. So it's making lists. The book has a lot of list making. And I guess for me, having this sort of catalog of who I am, like, how when if you ever have a babysitter, let's just say you ever hired a babysitter, and they come over and you leave them a list of numbers to call an emergency. You tell them where the bottle is. You tell them where the diapers are. You're like, don't give them green hummus because it'll make them sick, and like whatever. And you have this list of needs for your child. And I think as adults, we're sort of on a ticker tape where we just go. And sometimes we need to pause and recalibrate. Okay, if someone were to be in charge of me right now, which is me, what are all the different needs that are needing to be met? Like, what do I tell the babysitter? And I am the babysitter. What can't I eat? What time should I go to bed? What makes it so I don't cry? And then do that sort of assessing of who you are, and then start to really notice, okay, who in my life used to meet my needs and who can do that now? And it's often so different. And it's just, I think, being really open to the unexpected of, okay, so like I had certain people I just did not expect to be the deepest support ever. And other people who I was so hurt that they weren't there for me. And I had to just sort of flow with that, and started to recognize, okay, well, what do I really need? Okay, I need people to just chat with me about nothing a couple times a day, because my head is leaving this world and it's scared, and I don't want to think about my dad dying if he's going to die. I don't want to think about that he's dead. And those 5-minute calls, when I asked for them, I got them. But until I asked, people didn't know what it was that I might need. And so I started to just learn. And we are all learning ourselves. We mess up every day. All of us mess. Like, I don't think I'm the only one who's like, oh, I knew I shouldn't go to that person's house after 6. I was already tired, and finding ways to be like, okay, now I know, like, 1 interview, not 2 in a row. Or and it sounds really mundane and super cute and dumb sometimes to talk about this stuff, but we don't talk about it much, and we need it. And especially now that we're in, for my life this week, I had just gotten back to New Orleans. I had like bought my first pet. I had filled my fridge with groceries. I just, my book had literally just come out. I had just had a first week of school, and a category 5, I think it's 4 or 5, I'm not sure which it was, but an enormous hurricane hit New Orleans on a level. And there's that. And then there's like, okay, now we travel with COVID. And then, oh, by the way, like so-and-so's dying and so-and-so's sick and you need to have this done. And is someone going to take care of that fish at home? And we have new problems that we didn't have before. And we have, and they're on top of each other. Like we don't, it's not like anybody, you know, there was that TV show when I was little. I think it was like My Stepfather is an Alien. And the girl could put her fingers together like this. Whoops, I'm like looking in the picture, but not at my fingers. She could put her fingers together and pause time. And it was so cool. And then she could unpause whoever she wanted in time. And they could just hang out with everyone else frozen. And if I had that skill last Friday, I'd be like, not today. I can't have a hurricane. Like
Right.
I need to eat all these frozen pizzas in my freezer. I need to like get my fish to my friend's house in Mississippi so it doesn't die. I need to clean the house. I need to like do 1,000 things. And I would have just been like, not this week, and I'll pause. But I can't pause time.
Right.
Right. And none of us can. And so there's no time like right now to start practicing. Whoa, what do I need? How do I get my needs met? And a lot of us were taught never to meet our needs. Like very few of our, I don't know if your mom when you were a little girl was like, okay, when you grow up, like put yourself first.
Yeah.
Make sure that you put yourself before a man. Make
Yeah.
sure that you don't forget to like get 8 hours of sleep, exercise, love your body, make sure to have a lot of orgasms, and just take really, really good care of you. And then from there, all the relationships. And it's like, it's not our message culturally.
Right.
And we right now to like survive this time we're in do need to say, okay, like let's be a new parent. What do we need? I'm my babysitter. Like, okay, I've been eating a lot of like pancakes. They make my stomach hurt. No more pancakes. Like dumb stuff. And then bigger stuff. Like when I hang out with alcoholics, it makes me feel less safe. Can I start to direct my life towards people that I feel safe with? Like whatever. But that's part of grieving is that it's a sacred state. You need space to do it. And when you lose that space, it can harm you. And many of
Right.
us don't have space, but finding ways to make it. Like I know for me, Friday, someone came over to my house to make me dinner and I didn't know. And they brought a bottle of wine and then got into the liquor cabinet. And by like 9 p.m., I was scared. And
Aw.
it's not the biggest deal. I mean, it wasn't pleasant, but what's really bad is that I was sort of like resting into a state of integrating my very complicated week of I had to have like an emergency surgery and I had to evacuate to this town and that town and learn that my friends were safe or not safe or so and so's child we thought was gone and is not gone and I was gelling, you know, I was coming back
Right.
together. And when that person came over, my nervous system went back into alert. And so a lot of this is really just about the nervous system. Like, can we stay calm enough, long enough to recalibrate, recenter, and integrate what we've gone through? And I
Right.
think many of us have no time, but the time we do have, I think starting to practice to make it precious, to guard it, to put practices into place so that when you are down for the count, you get to use that rather than being like, oh, like my life is terrible, which is often what I do, is instead to be like, okay, I need to be down for a minute. I just went through something terrifying. I just lost something I loved or someone I loved, or I just witnessed violence. Like my body, just like if you had a little baby, you wouldn't be like, stop crying, get up, you crazy little thing. Like that's what we do to ourselves. But
Right.
we also need to be able to just take a breath. Like the first thing I did when I got out of like I drove away to Shreveport, Louisiana, and my hosts were really kind and gave me something to eat, and I went to sleep. I was just, and I called a friend the next day. It's like I keep falling asleep, like every time I try to do anything. And she said that's what happens when a trauma stops. You just need to go to sleep. And I think it's hard on our relationships when we just need to metabolize grief, but we don't know how to communicate that. Like, oh, it's not that I'm avoiding you. It's not that I don't love you. It's I have all these parts in me that I didn't know were there, and I'm trying to learn them so that I can
Oh,
live with
yes.
myself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the way you said that is just, yeah, beautiful because that's exactly what it is. You're trying to learn all these things that are now a part of you while also having just, shattered and lost a million things that used to be there. It's that collaborative, you know, craziness of gaining things and losing things all at the same time. Wow, I've never heard it like that. So that's really beautiful and truthful. So,
well, there's like a shattering, there's like a concept in the Kabbalah of like we all operate with these shells around us, and that the goal in spiritual practice is to break the shell, is to like bring us into this like larger shard of light. And that's part of why you're so attracted probably to people who are able to express their feelings now, because you've gone into this state. And so it's really confusing in that state though, because we are used to organizing ourselves like this. And everybody in every culture, it's not, no one's exempt from this. Like we're all, whether you grew up in like Kentucky in a Christian home, or you grew up in New York in a Jewish home, or you grew up in like like, I don't know, Montana in a Muslim home, like wherever you've grown up, it doesn't matter. Everyone was given a system, and death, I think for everyone on the planet, shakes the system of organizing in your mind into a new place. And I do think that we don't give ourselves enough of a refractory period to come back from that to the new order that we have within ourselves. And we don't give enough respect to that, in part because we like to pretend that death doesn't happen, because it's scary. It's really scary. And it kind of messes with capitalism to be like, well, after you make all that money, you're just going to die.
die. Yep. You're just dying. Yep. Oh, that's funny. I want to also say that from the very beginning, the book Forget Prayers, Bring Cake, the title alone is just genius. And I love that in the book you talk about, you're like, I didn't want prayers. I wanted cake, or I wanted macaroni and cheese, or I wanted this. And I think that is just like, I think every person that's grieving that reads the title alone is like, yes, I need this book, because so many people, especially now in the days of social media, and it's easy to show up for somebody and say, I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you. There are things that prayers cannot help necessarily. Like if you need macaroni and cheese for dinner, or if you need gas money because you've been driving back and forth for a month to visit your, dad or mom in the hospital, or, those needs. And so like, did the book title come to be that? Like, was it, as you were writing the book, or was it afterwards, as that was kind of your, theme through grief, is just that people, always offer you prayers, and really, in fact, you need other things, which is, another great thing about your book, that it's not only a memoir, but it's a guide on, things you can actually do to help yourself. And
Right.
So that part of the book and the book's title, I just would love to know, how did that come out,
Yes. Well, first of all, the irony is I'm a very prayerful person. And it's like really, prayer is so important to me. And I have a very strong relationship to my own spiritual practice. And so
Yep.
I know when I was just in Shreveport and these two men were like gabbing it up with me at a coffee shop, and I said, oh, I wrote this book, Forget Prayers. And I'm in the deep South down there, and his face just fell. He was so upset. He was like, I don't want that book. Like a lot of people get very upset when I say Forget Prayers, and they don't realize it's tongue in cheek, and that prayer
Right.
is really it's actually, I would argue that it's central to this book by the end.
Yes.
Like a lot
Yes,
of it is about like, what do we do with this now? But that being said, it did start to annoy me. It did feel sort of like an easy way out when I was really suffering, and people would be like, I'm praying for you. And I was like, I don't want you to pray for me. I want you to talk to me on the phone. I want and the title came about because that day, part of me also, I'm Jewish and I love all gods and all prayers of all kinds. But sometimes when someone was like telling me who they were praying to, and I was like, you think that's going to reach my dad? I don't know. Like my Holocaust survivor dad, maybe Jesus will protect him. I don't know. I'm sure someone on the phone is like, yes, of course. But, there were different times where I wasn't sure all the prayers were directed in the right direction. And,
Right.
but it was more that somebody showed up with two cakes, one for my father and one for my sister one day. And I was so mad. I was like, what about the cake I asked for? Because she was supposed to make me a carrot cake, and decided instead, like, it was just, I was expecting this carrot cake, and she showed up with like an olive oil cake and a chocolate cake. And I was feeling very bratty, and I was very upset that I didn't get what I wanted. And I went upstairs, and probably like 3 different people were sending me prayers in that moment. And I was like, I want a cake. I don't want a prayer. But I also, there were times when prayer really, really comforted me, and other
Absolutely.
people's prayers felt like I have a neighbor who's wheelchair bound, and she would always come up to me, and it was an electric wheelchair, and she would come up to my driveway whenever I came home, and she'd be like, "I'm praying for your daddy," and I always loved
Oh,
that. It made me feel
yes.
really good. It was just that sometimes I actually really think that the title was talking about also when people were imposing their theological beliefs on me. And I
Mm-hmm.
really believe very strongly, as like an interfaith person who believes in connecting to all people of all backgrounds, that we should give people permission to define their spiritual space before someone. So I've sometimes felt people were putting their ideas of the afterlife and God and think like really pushing them on me without checking like what made me feel good.
Right.
And there was like one woman who I really don't know very well when my dad died, and it was the nicest sentiment, but she's like, "I'm speaking to the angels, I'm praying for his ascent," and I was kind of like, I don't know if I think it's right for you to talk to my dad's angels. Like, we have a
Right.
team on that, but I don't know. Like, that felt very intimate. And
Intimate. Yeah.
so I was also navigating, like, well, what does it look like to give love to people that aren't just like you? And what does
Mm,
it mean to offer prayers to people who might not pray? And it's not
right.
me. I really am someone who can go to, if you wanted to take me to church, or you wanted to take me to like a Hindu temple, wherever I go, I recognize godliness, and I'm really grateful. But I think there's a lot of people that are really turned off by other people's theology on them. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a question I had, like, is there another way to say that too, of, hi, like, would prayers be comforting to you? Like, I would have loved that question.
Right.
Would it feel good for you if I prayed for your father? And I would have the option to say, no, what would feel really good to me is if you called me on Sunday, I'm really struggling.
Yes.
Or I could say, yes, could you pray to my father, and could you add in this name? Or like in Judaism, when you
Right.
pray to someone for someone's parent, you actually find out their mother and their grandmother's name, and you say like daughter of, daughter of.
Oh,
And there's like this whole ritual, but for some they wouldn't want that. Like, I know someone else who might be like, well, I'd like it to just be to Jesus, not to your mother and your grandmother. But in Judaism,
right.
it's very matriarchal. And so it's, I think giving people space for their prayers how they want them is important. And also giving, I found that like giving, I would have loved it if someone's like, hi, I'm going to a river, would you like to come sit with me and listen to the water and like pray? And I probably would have been like, yes, I would.
Yes.
Any of the, like, prayer is very comforting, as long as it's not, some people, I know a lot of people have a lot of violence and abuse they experienced in different religious settings. And so when people would say, oh, I would pray for you, to some of my friends, it would really upset them, like friends who left their fold or who were harmed sexually in their communities of all backgrounds, don't want you to impose prayer on them. And so I
Right.
think that was part of it, was like, okay, what can we do tangibly for the grievers who need to feel love? And for some, that's a prayer circle, and for some, that's a ton of cake.
Yes. Yeah, or both, just like you said. And I think for me, just like you, I mean, there was a time I was raised Catholic. I would consider myself just a Christian woman now, but I think that at the beginning of my grief journey, I turned away from faith and, was really just confused about what it meant anymore. But then I think for me, with the whole prayer thing, I became much more faithful, and now, feel pretty solid in where I am with my relationship, in faith. But I will say that I think what was damaging for me is not the people who actually prayed for me, but the people who just said that because that was what you're supposed to say on social media when a mom passes away or a dad passes away. People that would just say, I'm praying for your family. And I wanted to be like, out of these 350 comments, how many prayers actually went up today? How many people actually sat down and said my mother's name or my name, or, like they do in your faith, multiple people's names, and we're very intentional about 3 minutes or 1 minute to just say, right now I'm thinking about this person, and so I think for me, it was just wondering who's really doing that, and
Right.
so that's kind of, obviously when I read the book, it becomes evident a little bit more about your story and, all the things that we need and things like that. But I think when I first read the title, that's where I went with it. I was like, oh yes, just bring me a cake, because at least then I know you actually did it. Like, you're
Right.
here, the cake is here. I know it's done. It's a successful, experience.
Well, then
So,
I just met a woman at a reading last week in DC who said that she loves the title because that's her practice, is to bake her prayers into a cake. And I thought that
oh,
was really beautiful. And she's like, you don't need the prayer, you need the cake, because the cake is the prayer. And I thought that was really
oh,
nice.
my
Yeah.
mother would love that, because my mom was such a faithful woman, and she was a brilliant baker, and I could totally see her living through that. Like her baking was her, prayer to you, and now you get to, enjoy it.
Well, it's a lot. There's a lot of spiritual practice. I love that. And there's a lot of, like, I remember once with this very Orthodox, like weekend I went on, that I'm not Orthodox, but Orthodox in Judaism is like a very strict practice. And I was really grateful, for the way that she taught us to braid bread and to braid prayers into the bread. And then we ingest prayers, and this idea of, like, there's been a lot of traditions from across the world have putting, like, I did a yoga teacher training in the Catskills at Sivananda Ashram, and when we went, they would before we cooked the meals, you'd go in the kitchen and you'd say your mantras and you'd give your gratitude, so that the good vibes that your system had would be translated to the food. But that if you went in angry and you were firebrand, that the food would be different in the bodies of another person. Then I remember afterwards, I was living in Colorado after that retreat, and I went to buy a burrito, and they make them on site, and I got really scared, like, what if he puts bad vibes in my
Not you
burrito?
do it.
So I was like, could you please make my burrito with love, please? I was
Can
like,
you
please.
please smile while you're making my burrito and think happy thoughts? Next time I go into like Chipotle, I'm gonna be like, are you happy while you're making this?
Right.
Oh, that's funny.
I'm just want to, like, give gratitude to Erica Salazar for this idea of, like, you don't know until you know, and emotions move so quickly. And I find that that's one of the things that is scary, actually, when you're grieving, is like things that upset you or excited. Like, I had tears when I didn't expect them, and anger when I didn't expect it. And I was just sort of almost like I was pregnant all the time, and like very hormonal. Everything was just like shifting and moving in me and growing and changing. And I had all kinds of feelings. And I think part of the book also just has all these practices to help us slow down, just like a wink, so that when, like, I know in my family, when it gets too far, we will yell, like it'll burst into like this very strange, almost animalistic yelling. And I've been really kind of like studying, okay, what will make that not happen? And, dumb things like drink a lot of water, or like eat your protein, or like just little ways where we are moving so fast in our world. People are like, oh, the times we're living in. And of course we're living in rough times, and times have always been rough, whether we could see that,
Yep.
whether our lives blocked us from being conscious of who's being murdered and who's being, like, climate change harmed, or who's, there's just horror at all times happening on this globe that we are now no longer comfortable, is another thing. And that fact, though, requires us to be really gentle. And I'm terrible at it. That's why I'm good at preaching it, is that I'm learning the same things I'm talking about, which is like this week when I had all these crises after the other, and I was a lucky one. I had a place to go, enough money to get there. And a lot of people had no money and nowhere to go, were in their houses with no electricity and no food for a week. And it's really a dire situation in Louisiana for those who don't have money right now, in a way that is kind of incomprehensible and shouldn't be legal in this country. And then I got to the next place and I was like, oh my God, there's just so many things happening that are upsetting me that I don't even know what to do. And that practice of being like, whoa, that's upsetting. I'm always looking like, who's going to fix this for me? Who's going to take this pain away? Like, there's a book that's called, like, will you be my mother? Will you be my mother? It's like
Yes.
this little animal. And that's how I always feel when I'm in a crisis. Like, who's going to fix it for me? And I get really upset and angry that it's still here. I'm still upset. And then there's always this breaking point where the answer is me. Like, I have to sit here and say, dang, that was really bad what you just went through. Whoa, because it's possible no one, like, I'm in DC right now, And it's very hard for the people where I live in this particular, I live in, it's like a fancy area of Washington, and it's hard for them to understand what's happening in Louisiana. And people like to ask me questions, and it's very exciting to them. But for me, it's very disturbing. And
Right.
I had to come to the conclusion that no one here will be able to sit with what I've been through.
Yep.
They can't, because they can't quite even imagine it. So I have to do that for myself. And
Absolutely.
I think the more we do that, our feelings slow down a little bit when we recognize, hey, I'm suffering, just like we would for someone who we love. Hey, this is really a lot right now. And that doesn't mean like you lie down and like get subsumed by like the underbelly of your sofa. It just means that like if 8 times a day you like look in the mirror and say, holy moly, I've never experienced this. This is hell for me. And I know for someone else this is easy, but for me, this is the worst I could have imagined. That alone will probably make it easier. Just admitting to yourself, this is so hard, and being just careful and caring enough to be like, well, it makes sense that I just yelled at my husband and threw a plate because my world's been shattered. And instead of being like, oh, why am I crazy? What do I do? You can just I'm going to go take a salt bath, and I'm going to admit to myself that I'm having a terrible time, and I'm going to call my 3 main supports now, rather than just like going downstairs and zoning out and watching TV and being really creeped out. Like actively tending to the fire is part of our job.
Absolutely. Wow. Yeah. And I think that just everything that you've said tonight and all of the experiences that you've went through are what really make your book, like, like I said, you kind of feel like you are understood and you're going through it, and it's part your story, but then you say, hey, here's what happened in my story, and here's how to use this to help you. And so it's just extremely practical and truthful and relatable. And so if everybody that's watching and anybody that watches this later, I just want to show you how beautiful this book is. Forget Prayers, Bring Cake. It's a single woman's guide to grieving. And like I said before, do not let the name fool you. Even a mother in Indiana that's married to the love of her life related to this book, every single chapter, every single story. And even now, 4 years into my journey, there were still things that I thought, oh, I either wish I would have done that sooner, or I could still utilize that now. And so I'm just so honored to talk to you, especially after reading this book. Somebody actually sent it to me in one of my messages and said, hey, this book is coming out. I think it would be perfect for you to read. And of course I snatched it up right away. And so, so thank you just so much for your time. And like I said before, I'll put all of your links and everything in the comment section. Is there any last advice you have for us, or words
Well, I was
of
going to say,
inspiration?
first of all, just thank you for what you give everyone. It's pretty remarkable. I know you're serving a lot of people's needs, and I'm grateful for how you've transformed your grief into medicine, and for your giving me time today. I appreciate that. I don't normally do this, but because of the conversation we had, I have a website, which is my name.com, MarissaNathanGerson.com. But if you go to the writing section, those of you that want to learn more about sex and religion, sex and disability, trauma and sex, inherited trauma, all that, there's all my old articles on there. And it's a pretty fun and strange, it's a strange deep dive, but I got a lot of wild assignments like a couple years ago. So for those who wanted more of that. And
Absolutely.
I think in conclusion, I want to just say I respect everyone's grief journey. I hate the word journey because I've watched so much reality dating shows, but they're all on their like journey together. But I really believe that however you do it is fine. Like we all just have to find our new self, and that's what part of grief is how will I reorganize all. It's almost like if you had a plug in your ear and you couldn't hear anything, and then you took all the plugs out and it's like so loud, and you just have to figure out how to calibrate. And we're all being unplugged in a great way when we're grieving. Even though it seems like the world ended, it's actually beginning, because it's the rest of your life that's starting, and now you have new parts and you're missing old ones, and that's a tragedy until it's reorganized, and then it's the rest of your life. So I sort of give everyone a blessing, a non-denominational blessing for ease on your grief, and ease and self-respect for what you're going through. Like really honor that it is very hard to grieve. It is not easy when you don't have the tools. Most of us don't. And that it's a respectful journey when you honor that you're emerging as a new incredible woman, if you are a woman.
Yeah. Oh, yes, that's beautiful. And thank you so much for your kind words. And for that, that's a perfect way to end it. So thank you everyone for joining in. And if you guys watch this later and have comments for us, just go ahead and let us know. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.
Bye.